And it's another discussion. This is reverse redaction. My name is Judah McNeil, and I'm here with Ford Seeuws, and we're going to reverse redaction.
Reverse redact.
We're going to reverse redact something that is a form of, I feel like there's some reverse redactionality involved with accelerationism.
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, before we get started, I just want to remind everybody or tell everybody we are not only on iTunes, but also on Google Play and Stitcher Radio. Search for reverse redaction. If you throw a Judah or Ford in there or both, you're more likely to find it.
So before we get started on this topic, just so everyone understands, if there are any accelerationists or neo-reactionaries listening to this, we are total noobs in this. Like, I just found out about crypto in November and I bought my first Bitcoin. And so I've been commenting on Bitcoin, but I still don't know jack. I mean, I'm at such a superficial level. And then I found out about accelerationism, like in terminology, within the last month. And so I'm even more of a noob with this. So feel free, if you are part of any of these strains of these movements, to give us feedback. You can email me at theservingviolinist@gmail.com, or you can contact us, through Twitter. What's our Twitter?
Reverse.
Is it reverse redaction?
No, it's REV redaction. REV
okay.
at REV redaction. Or Ford like the car.
Or Ford Light the Car on Twitter. You can get me on Twitter that way as well. So happy to hear feedback and, better input so that we know better what we're talking about. So this is our noob reaction to these movements. And to anyone who's not familiar with these, or if you start reading some of the stuff that we're commenting on today and you're like, oh man, I don't know about this. Like, RTs do not equal endorsements. Because we're talking about this does not mean we agree with everything that has been said by every neo-reactionary or every accelerationist. Right. I do think the importance of free speech cannot be overstated. So we need to be able to talk about anything. I mean, anything. You should be able to read Mein Kampf and give a book report on it. And that doesn't mean that you worship Hitler. You need to be able to respond to stuff that you disagree with, especially so you can sharpen your own mental acumen, and I feel like we have all, and this is, a lot of us are guilty no matter what side of these political or social or economic or moral or religious debates are. We're all just so accustomed to bubbles. Mm-hmm. So I've bumped into stuff that I patently disagree with in the course of reading some of the stuff. But I have been refreshed, because some of what the symptoms that they're describing, the problems with Western capitalism or the problems with Western democracy, I have seen these things. I haven't been able to articulate what has frustrated me so much. And so some of the way that they describe the symptoms, I think, is really accurate. I am less inclined to agree with some of their prescriptions, but I think there's some really good conversation going on here that's giving us better tools to try to parse through these stale debates between, like, pro-life and pro-choice and globalism and nationalism and communism and capitalism, when none of these things are real. Like, they're not real anymore. We have a merge of all of these things. It's become this, we have this binary talking points when we're dealing with extremely difficult topics, extremely complex. So we need more language. We need more speech. We need more definitions for more words. We need more things on the table to accurately decipher what in the world is going on anymore. Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'm not even a noob. I'm just a feeder. I mean, I have not. I'm just running in there like, whoa. Now, from what I've seen, from what I've been able to ascertain, now you started following these guys even before you even. I mean, how you came to
had
to
no
know
terminology,
about them.
right? For what these guys were, but I just
But
started
you were following them on Twitter.
Twitter, yeah. So Akira is the first account I think that I followed. He has a you know, in my game knowledge from 2001 to 2010, well, 2013, really, like 12-year gap there of no video game knowledge. But his avatar, I believe, is Shodan from System Shock, which is this, you know, I guess conscious artificial intelligence. And so Akira, whose actual username is some I don't even know. I don't know, some, you know, code. I can't remember how I came across him, but there's some tweet caught my eye. So I followed him on and off for a year and a half or something like that. And I was following Nick Land and didn't realize it for quite some time because he doesn't have, you know, an avatar. So I'd followed them on and off, and then they'd say something that I was like, oh, I don't know about that, you know, and it's just, you know, it was during the height of probably the election, you know, when everything was just so heightened, and I would go off on a Ford rant, and then I feel guilty about it, and I'd be like, oh, I just need to not think about these political things, and I just unfollow people. So, and I mean, I lost friends during the election. Like, I'm trying to mend some of those relationships now, you know, like, you know, like, let's just talk about something else for now, you know.
You're not as stealthy as me. I was actually just thinking about that today. I remember you saying in one of our episodes that you were one of the most honest people that you can come across, and it's true. And I'm not so much. I'm willing to manipulate the facts.
Right. You just got nod and smile. Yeah, I like that politician a lot. I used to be. No, at a certain point, it's just part of human society. Like, if you don't, you know, if you're just a douche about every single thing, like, you're not going to have anyone to talk to. And I feel like, you know, because we're all individuals, we all have such, you know, for all the mainstream tastes that we do share, there's usually something like, I'll be amazed at the people who liked Star Wars and I didn't. And then I mean, that can just start the new Star Wars. And I mean, that could like become as bad as a religious or political debate. Yeah. Like, it just.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, there's a lot to be said about that. Let's get into accelerationism. Let me kind of give you my take on it, and you can help me understand it. You know, as a newcomer, I think it'll be helpful that way to do it that way.
Okay.
So, from what I can tell, I kind of feel like this has sort of an evolutionary iteration of libertarianism, and I can see. So I used to during the 2008 election, and before, I was very critical and engaged a lot with Ron Paul,
right.
You know, fans and libertarians of that ilk. And what I found is that a lot of them were very angry. And because they could see a lot wrong with the world, but couldn't do anything about it. And I heard Nick Land in an interview talk about how accelerationism kind of looks at where libertarianism was going, and saw so many people saying like, well, when things do this, or when, kind of talking in this you know, a lot of hypothetical. And so some people got together and said, or started writing about the fact that, look, this monster is not going anywhere.
Right.
I was talking about this yesterday. It's not a group of people. We're talking about this Leviathan, which you wrote about, you know. Right. It is a movement, and it is a network of power, and influence.
And the way I kind of understand it, and again, there are just so many different strains of thought here, and there are people who come from very different ideological or political backgrounds who gathered round and had conversations about this and came to fundamentally different conclusions. So Mark Fisher came at things from a more communist standpoint. Marx,
Zizek kind of,
yeah, that's another example. So when people say, "Oh, this is all right," well, Mark Fisher was not all right. He, and unfortunately, the world lost him. He died last year. And I haven't read too much about it, but he had a female contemporary, and they were coming at it from a very different place than Nick Land or Curtis Yarvin. So if you think Curtis Yarvin, like, he would be the most alt-righty of all of them, and then Nick Land is kind of like, I would say, still more on the rightish area.
He's a little bit more moderate from what I can tell.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely more moderate than Yarvin is, but Yarvin is more moderate than people want to give him credit for, I think. People who might read him and automatically jump to the conclusion that he's a neo-Nazi. Mark Fisher, on the other hand, is way not on the same, coming at this from the same angle, but having frustrations with the same problem.
Right. And this problem being that there is a global economy, political system of power that is marching forward.
Yeah.
And getting bigger and bigger. And I think that's the thing that, of course, I really jive with.
The difference being, for most of these, is that it's not a group of people. It's not like the Rothschilds. It's not like the Jews. It's not, a lot of these conspiracy groups.
That's why I call it a movement.
Right. But it's even not a movement. It's almost like a technocratic, non-conscious, artificial intelligence. Like it's like it's not aware of itself, but the rules of this system work regardless of whether it's conscious or not. But it's a machine that actually works.
Yeah, it's a machine. Yeah.
It's a machine that actually works. And so the best way to do it, like if you think of it from a literary perspective, it is 1984 from Orwell on the one side and Huxley's Brave New World on the other side merged. We're seeing both of these things almost in equal parts. I think in America, we see more of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. But that if there is a political sci-fi book that defines my frustration with the West, even before I could articulate any of this stuff, that was my number one book. Like as an evangelical Christian kid, like in college, I had the Bible and I had Brave New World. And like, those were my two means of like trying to interpret the world. And so Brave New World still holds up for me. I mean, every time I think about that book, I'm just like, golly, we're not in 1984. We're not in the communist, we're going to stamp out all speech and we're going to rebrand history and we're going to redact everything and make you think this one thing. Although those things kind of do happen. But the real power is in the things that the powers that be are giving us to enslave ourselves willingly. And that's the whole idea of Brave New World, is that you don't care that you're a slave because it's pleasant. It feels good. And so that's why someone like Mark Fisher and Nick Land they could meet at the table, even though one's a Marxist and one's totally not a Marxist, but they both see the problems with whatever we have here. It is not capitalism as such. It's this strange amalgamation of capitalism with centralized power. It's
government, really.
Well, it's not just government. I mean, even in, I would say there are moments in House of Cards where you get these great little just vignettes in which, I'm blanking on his name, but he's the tycoon that runs all the nuclear power plants. So he has basically the power over the grid. And, there's this battle for power. He's the richest in comparison with him and Frank Underwood. Like, he's richer. He has more like physical power, but then, Frank Underwood has governmental power and he is a great demagogue. So one of these is a better communicator to the masses and the other is better at moving behind the scenes. Who is the ultimate power in that circumstance? And it's like, yeah, it's actually kind of hard to figure out. And that's kind of what House of Cards is about. It's like, who actually holds the reins? You think about Game of Thrones, that question comes up too. Who holds the reins? The master of coin, the king, or the religious leader, or the army? Who holds the and what I think accelerationism is saying is it's the game. It's that jockeying for power between these superpowers of industry, superpowers of finance, superpowers of politics, that it's kind of difficult to blame any one of them, but they create this system that's almost impenetrable.
But it's not a system that just popped up. It's something like I was thinking about this morning. in the same way that you talk about, I think you make a great point about us, sort of, sort in the modern age, we just sort of wallow in the privilege and excess that is provided to us by all on the backs of all the people that have come before us, all the work that has gone into the infrastructure, right between our plumbing. Like it's like magic the way it works to us now. We just opens up, but it's so much, so many millions of hours of work has gone into that. Now in the same way, the same thing is true of the whatever this whatever you want to call it, this power, this Leviathan, has come out of lots and lots of work by some good people, some bad people. Our forefathers set it in motion, whether they knew it or not.
Right. And I think some of it is, a lot of these players in this game have been innocuous. They had no idea what they were birthing for the future. And this is why, you think of Jeff Goldblum's character in Jurassic Park, and a butterfly can flap its wings in Peking, and in Central Park, you get rain instead of sunshine. That the notion of chaos theory. You do not know, when you deal with something so complex, how one tiny decision can affect the whole. And so, like on my byline on my subtitle on my website is now, Leviathan is but an extension of your harmless vice. Like that, the truth is, in our brave new world, that even our most harmless vice, and sometimes our faux virtue, can actually add to the power of this machine. So a lot of things that seem like a good, like Teddy Roosevelt, I'm going to go bust up trusts. That seems like a good thing. Oh, I'm fighting for the little man. I'm fighting for the small business, or I'm fighting for the small consumer, and so that he's going to be able to buy at a lower price. Well, but he's not introspective enough, not honest with himself enough to realize that he's not fighting the trusts that are in bed with the politicians, his buddies. So he's not, and I honestly believe with someone like Teddy, it was not a power play like, oh, I'm going to help my buddies out. It was just like innocuous to him. But those kinds of decisions have set in motion that, or you think about Woodrow Wilson's progressive ideology, and that everyone wants to blame neocons for this. Like, we're going to police the world. Well, no, that's what comes straight down the pipe from Woodrow Wilson. This notion that we're going to export democracy to everyone. Oh, that seems like a great idea in the short term. But then when you see it played out, it's like, oh, well, who is everyone voting for in this one area? Oh, ISIS. So, I mean, sometimes democracy, a lot of the critics of democracy were actually the founding fathers. There's a lot of people you would never expect to be critics of democracy, because who ends up winning in a democratic system? The person who either buys votes, lies, or pits people against each other. And that's why 2018, we have a red and blue two-party system. Like we have a less complex political system than Socrates. They had more options on the table in terms of what they could talk about than we can 2,500 years later or whatever. It's just absurd.
Can you help me out and articulate very clearly, maybe concisely, what the Leviathan is, like the problem?
Well, the idea here is that Akira, the reason why he has Shodan as his avatar is AI is on the way. Leviathan is the artificial intelligence that hasn't become conscious yet. And, if you want to think it in a mainstream popcorn sense, you can think that movie I, Robot with Will Smith. Like, at a certain point, the machines are going to realize, oh, the only way to save these people is to save them from themselves. So we have to step in. We have to intervene. And if you think about so much of what the system does now, it's that already without being conscious. It's like, oh, well, this kid was joking around and said something bad about their parents, and someone overheard it. And next thing you know, they were like, what, did your parents do something bad to you? And then they start like, and then, okay, the Department of Children and Families comes in, and now that kid and that parents have separated for 2 weeks. This crap happens.
What is it? the road to hell is paved by good intentions.
Good intentions, yeah. So these, the system's like, I'm going to come in and save you. It takes a village. I'm sorry, but I mean, she is part of this whole idea. It takes a village to raise a child. So the system kind of intervenes in people's private lives. Next thing you know, it's not the Pope that's in your bedroom. It's this machine. There's this brilliant scene, and if you want to see my version of what this looks like, it's in Philip K. Dick's collection of short stories. Let me get it real quick. So again, there's a tendency to want to blame Hillary or the globalists or Davos or the Bilderbergs or whatever, like the people, some small cadre of people. No, this thing is too big for a small cadre to control. It's a system of checks and balances that is so out of whack, not conscious yet, but our AI is on the way. I mean, deep learning has beaten the best chess players on earth. 5D chess is just around the corner. So this one right here, my favorite short story in this Philip K. Dick reader collection of his short stories is called Sales Pitch. And it just gets to our oversaturated subsidized reality. Again, this is not capitalism. This is, I don't know. Some people will still use that word capitalism. I think that's too reductive of the term, because it's something other than capitalism. It is consumerism as religion. Like, that's what I really believe it is. It's consumerism as religion. And everything has been tainted by machine-powered industrialism. So things that don't work as a factory, that don't work fundamentally. People, if you go to church, people are treated as products on an assembly line. Oh, we had 35 in last week's Sunday school. Like, that is an industrial mindset. Like, oh, we got to optimize to, bring in more. Like that is something that's post-industrial. So it's post-industrial, it's ad-based, it's consumerism as religion. It's planned obsolescence as operation. We're going to make these things so they break, so people have to come back and buy more. And everyone runs it like that. The government runs like that. NGOs run like that. Churches run like that. Businesses run like that. I'm sorry, that's not capitalism. That is disposable consumerism as power. Like, whenever you read Mises or Rothbard, like, these are idealistic people who work their butts off. Rothbard's one of the most prolific writers ever. And so these are not people who just believe this pie in the sky dream that human beings could actually produce stuff. Like they didn't just sit on their laurels and depend on what came before. They were massively outputting stuff. So a capitalist, I really believe a capitalist believes that I'm going to make this thing and I'm going to go make something else. I'm not going to sit here and just let this machine churn out money and print money for the rest of my life. Money doesn't grow in trees, right? Like, we've heard that since we were kids. But the disposable post-industrial consumerist believes that machines can print money. Money does grow in trees. That's not capitalism, but that is our religion. That is what guides us. Money grows on trees.
Okay, now let's try to focus here, because this is really complicated.
So, well, let me just mention this one thing about the sales pitch here. So the short story, it's just really great. I don't want to spoil any of it, but if you don't read this, I mean, it's almost absurd, this story. And then you get about midway into it, you're like, this isn't absurd. This is like real. I mean, this could be next month. Like, it's that level, with the level of ads that we have just forced in front of us. And at this point, like in this point in the future, like, you can't even escape them, because their holograms will like come inside your vehicle. Like, you can't close your eyes. You can still hear them because they have auditory inputs and stuff. So again, it's a subsidized buy consumption model, not production model. And I think that's what it is. Yeah. More.
Oh, I thought you were going to read part of the story.
But that's the idea. It's just more. It's just more consumption. It's a locust that just eats up the world.
It's a system, though, right?
Yeah, it says again. I don't think it's self-aware, and I don't think any one person is pulling all the strings. But everyone has had to make compromises in order to get by. So I think, like, when I read things that Elon Musk tweets or Peter Thiel writes, like, on some level, I'm like, rooting for these guys, because I am not fundamentally a pessimist. I actually believe the future can be better. I think we can solve some of these things. But when I read them and some of the conclusions they've come to make their way in the world, and the way in which they've played along nice with the government, I'm like, this is the same model that tycoons, railroadmen, JP Morgan were doing 150 years ago, and how they consolidated power in the financial system and in the manufacturing sector in bed with government. And so Thiel and Musk do the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing Morgan and Rockefeller were doing. In which they're not actually, everyone's in so much of a hurry. We just got to do this because someone else is going to do it next week. It's like, well, maybe it doesn't, maybe it doesn't deserve to exist then, Yeah. Like, and I think now, so a lot of the accelerationist movement, they're like, there's no stopping the juggernaut at this point. So let's just keep contributing to the system, because
it's not just that there's no stopping it. It's the idea, from what I can tell, it's the idea that every attempt to try to stop it actually strengthens it, because what you're doing is you're actually so you're just limiting the fringes of, so the outliers, and really in the feedback loop, giving the system an idea of what doesn't work, and so it gets stronger.
Yes. That's a pretty good way of putting it. It's a very resilient, it's like the Borg collective. I mean, that's a pretty good moment in Star Trek, I think. Next Generation, resistance is futile, right? Like, the more that you attack it, the more that it can adapt to your attacks. Humans are the parasites to this parasite, and so it's going to find a way to co-opt us. There's so many metaphors that have teased at this idea, but never quite gone as deep as where these commentators and philosophers are getting to. Like, you just read this stuff, they put in 2 paragraphs what it would have taken me 5 pages to write, and I still wouldn't have quite gotten it at the same level. Like, so Moldberg, Curtis Yarvin, I say his name wrong every time. Moldbug, that's his pen name. But Yarvin wrote this 5-part blog post, How Dawkins Was Pwned. And it is fascinating. Like, I wish I'd have read this back in the day, because I was a good evangelical Christian boy, frustrated by the new atheists, the 4 horsemen of the atheist apocalypse. And the more I read them, I came to my own conclusions about it. But Dawkins it just always frustrated me. But the way that, and Yarvin's an atheist, so it's again, like, I don't agree with him. And Yarvin would say, I'm part of the problem because I still believe in a God, and that is part of what has given this, he calls it the cathedral, this universalism. That's what he defines it as. He defines it as this, it's basically a religion without a God. But it keeps going on, the same track. Nietzsche said, if you pull the Christian out, or the God out of this whole framework, it all falls apart. But this universalism, the cathedral, has been going, just saying, well, we're not going to talk about that there's no God behind any of this. We still believe in all this stuff. We still believe in, the progressive ideal of making the world a better place, and we're going to eradicate poverty, and we're going to eradicate everything, and everything's going to be a perfect utopia. But what was 1984 and Brave New World about, except for making a utopia? That's what happens when you make a utopia.
All right. So I need it simplified for me. So this global corporo political Leviathan is growing in spite of what anybody can do. And the more we try to stop it, the more we try to limit it, it just strengthens it. So that's sort of the premise of accelerationism. Now, then they take it. So then the acceleration comes in, where they say it can only eat itself eventually. It will. So one of the best quotes I heard was that the political aspect of it, government aspect of it, Land said, somebody pointed out that in order to diminish it, we must incorporate it into commercialize it. He said, commercialize. So accelerating into the aspect of the corporatism, the commercialization,
right?
We use it against itself by commercializing government.
Yeah, make the government a business. It already is. Let's quit lying to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just formalize it and have a board of directors. Let's formalize it and have an IPO. At least then, when Yahoo, I mean, some of these things managed to survive somehow. How is Yahoo still around? I don't know. I really don't understand.
Kmart and Sears too.
So there are exceptions, but somehow I think they're only functioning because of some sort of government subsidy, or they're just good accountants. I don't know what they're doing, but they're doing some little magic mystery thing. But they don't have the power. They may still be a business, quote unquote, but they don't have the power that Amazon does. They don't have the power that Google does. They certainly don't have the power as Apple. I just think, and I had this revelation yesterday. Okay, this is going to be kind of, I'll say it. So I feel like I haven't gone to church in a while. And for the longest time I went to church, I was thinking, I still am a believer. I still believe in God. Like, if I don't go and participate in my religious heritage, then it's not going to go away. Atheists have this delusion. You want to talk about an atheist delusion? I've lived in India for 5 years. Okay, there's a new God man birthed every day over there. There's a new dude, and I'm telling you, you think Ted Haggard's bad, you think that dude in Houston's bad, you think televangelists are bad. Okay, just multiply that times 100. Okay, that's the amount of people, new followers they have. Every week you got a new one of these guys. Religion ain't going nowhere. Superstition ain't going nowhere. And I do believe there's a difference between religion and superstition. So I was, for the longest time I kept going to church because I was thinking, well, if I don't go, who's gonna be a voice of reason? Who's gonna say, it's still gonna exist? Why pretend that it's going away totally? But I just couldn't, I just got to the point I couldn't handle it anymore. And then, recently I had the thought, I was like, what if I just think of it as a business? What if I just think of the church as it exists in a space, with the building? I just think of it as a business, and I'm going there. I go to Starbucks not because I love Starbucks. I go to Starbucks because it's a cheap rent. I pay them $2 for coffee, and I can sit there for 3 hours and write. That's better than paying rent. So taking
accelerationism into your qualms with religion,
and just say, okay, I give up. I don't think this is the church anymore, because I don't think that this was what Jesus talked about when he meant church. But I'm going to think of this as a Christian social club, and it's helping people. It is. There's tons of things that frustrate me about, money management and the way that money's spent and the things that are done. And I just want to rip my hair out, and the ideology and the superstitions and the cultural lag, the atavistic music, it's so all the stuff that I get frustrated about, but it's still serving people. And I saw that in India too, with religions I disagreed with. Now, are there the charlatans who are enslaving people? Yes, absolutely. In every religion I've ever seen, there are charlatans who enslave people, but they're not all that dude. They're not all televangelists. They are providing a service. They are providing a shoulder to cry on. They're providing counseling services for people who can't afford a counselor. I see these people. I better, probably go see a counselor for it. I probably should take medicine. Oh, okay. Well, how are you going to do that? You can go to church for free, and you can get some amount of that, or a temple, or
But like your approach here, there is a what's that word? It's like a sub you're flipping it on its head, you know, in a way, or you're kind of sneakily doing something else.
Well, because the only way you can be sneakily or subversive with it
Subversive, yes.
is because the system has been subverted. So the church has been subverted by this parasite of what we're, you know, accelerationists are reacting to. And it is this, you know, they call it the cathedral. So that's what Moldbug calls it, the cathedral. I call it consumption as God. You know, like that's what our real God is. And we don't realize, like, it's becoming, okay, maybe it's not God, capital G level, but it's an idol. And it's an idol that we bow down to every day without realizing it. You know, you don't have to literally bow down to something in order to actually make it your highest goal. And, you know, we can, you know, we all are just full of contradictions, right? Like, oh, I got this ideology and this is my bent and I'm on this thing. And then you see the next minute, like, you know, it's the communist wearing the Che Guevara shirt. Like, Che would shoot you in the head if he saw you wearing a shirt and emblazoned that you paid $20 for at a designer store. Like, he would shoot you in the head. You're a capitalist pig. Congrats. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you, you know, put your money where your mouth is. So, like, but there's so much of what we actually believe is from what we buy, how we spend our time. That's what we actually believe. And so the parasite to me is, you know, what a lot of evangelical Christians call the health wealth gospel. You know, they'll sit there and talk about the charlatan on TV who's just, you know, hey, I prayed over this handkerchief and you can take it home and it'll heal you. Well, that's great and all, but you know, I'm pretty sure that almost every church from Catholic on down to the smallest denomination is believing in the health wealth gospel. I mean, just look at the Vatican. Look at how much money there is there. Like,
well, the reason I like the cathedral analogy a little bit better is because we've always had consumerism as God. Just it has an infrastructure now that's been built over so many years that it is a structure. It is a thing. Whereas, you know, the religion, the idea, the love of things and giving power to a bigger system, that's been around since the first day of
I think it's a mix of the two. So on the one hand, you have your individual desire, and you know, so much of what I've seen from like short-term mission trips where it's like ecotourism or poverty tourism, like where you're buying an experience, like, oh, I'm gonna go serve these people. No, you're actually paying an indulgence, you know, for your guilt for actually having money. And so, and I know this sounds very cynical, but I've just witnessed it too much. Like, and I've seen it myself where I'm going to go, I'm going to help these people, but really I'm paying for the experience so I can be more enlightened, or I can pay penance, you know?
Yeah.
And so the consumption idea is the one part where we think that paper money, fiat money can buy happiness or good life. And then on the other side, we have the cathedral, which is the ideology is we want to help everyone and be good. But what does that even mean anymore? And so as long as we say that we do it, it's like the, you know, good intentions on the one side and indulgences on the other, you know, I guess.
Right. But the cathedral is also the, like I was saying, the structure, the infrastructure, but the machine, the mechanism that is set that you can just, you know, get in and go around. You know, like you can, it's a thing that it's a system that is in place, you know, that has been built that we can enter.
Right.
Rather than it's not in us, it's out there and we can enter it, you know?
Right. And I mean, I just think it's so pervasive at this point that it's two things. It's one is a machine that is external, and the other, it's an ideology. It's a reprogramming. That's a good way to word it. It's rogue code that has worked its way into our collective subconscious. And it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim, a Hindu, an agnostic, an atheist, a non-theist, or you know, an evangelical Christian. You are this rogue code. If you've spent any time in the city post 1940, this rogue code has worked its way into your subconscious.
That actually helps me a lot understand the next part, because, okay, so we have this Leviathan, we have this cathedral, we have this consumerism is God. Now what? So acceleration says
two possibilities.
Subversively, we accelerate, but what does that mean?
So there's two possibilities. So one of them is it's over just, you know, buckle up, boys, and
But that's not accelerating it.
well, yeah, buckle up. Well, and yeah, just I think they're mostly along for the ride. And then the other side, though, is exit. Like, forget about the cathedral, forget about the universalism as religious political structure, leave it, exit. So that's Yarvin's suggestion, is that you just exit the political process, you exit the cathedral. If you are participating, again, you're participating in this sort of like, well, I mean, I think some of us have been doing these kind of things as coping mechanisms. Again, like, oh, yes, I love Katy Perry. Like, you can't say it because, like, whatever. Like, and you wouldn't say it to everybody, but there's somebody, like, I'm not going to get out of here unless I just nod and smile. So, some of it is maybe just nodding and smiling. Yes.
Okay, but like my vision of destructive acceleration, right, is let's call it creative destructive acceleration. Is I've heard some people saying like paying way too much at tolls, so it messes up the system.
Oh, interesting. No, I hadn't heard about that.
Okay, well, there's a lot of like the subversive like activism against capitalism, but this is accelerated capitalism. So I guess that example is too. So how do we do that? Because there's a huge technological component to this, right? There's the cipher. Now, explain to me where the cipher, the cybernetics, comes into this.
I don't actually know. Like, I think I'm still dipping my toe in this whole thing. I think, a lot of the accelerationists are really admiring, what's happened with Bitcoin. So Nakamoto and or Nick Szabo, what has happened there, that is one of the most decentralizing potential moves, in my opinion, since the printing press. That when it first came out, before it became an industrial printing press. So that just the notion you can have peer-to-peer relation without the cathedral in the way. But the cathedral's trying to find ways, of course, and they're going to do it. I mean, there are actually companies that are trying to, analyze the blockchain of Bitcoin to find, who made what transaction, and then they can track your money. Because I mean, follow the money. Like that's how the cathedral works. But yeah, I don't know. That's a question. I think in terms of really accurately characterizing their strategies for the next step, I don't know. I'm basically only at this point understanding part of what they're saying about the symptoms, their diagnosis of the symptoms.
Well, what you said about the programming of our society, right? Mm-hmm. The code within our society, what is that called? Our day-to-day. So people have talked about, in politics, people talk about manipulation of that sort of thing, right? And because you can manipulate it because there is a code that we live by, right? That is ingrained in what we do. It's that infrastructure. It's that it is the structures that we partake in every day in commerce,
right?
But also socially.
Right. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know as far as what I think we should do. Again, like I come across as a big pessimist, especially these last couple of years, because I just haven't, part of it is I just didn't know who to talk to about the stuff. So finding some of these people, even the ones that like watching that video from Zizek that you sent, like, again, okay, he's coming out from a Marxist position. I never agree with Marxists, like on almost anything, except for maybe the access to the means of production thing. Because as a content creator, like having access to the means of production, having access to open source programs, like that was huge for me. I mean, that gave me my step up to getting my own equipment and everything. I could, but anyways, like, so I have very little in common with him from a political economic perspective, but just hearing him talk about diagnosing the problem, like, oh man, I definitely align with this guy more than Noam Chomsky. I definitely align with this guy more than Marx. So, I think that there are a lot more it was just been encouraging to find other people who are frustrated and are actually talking articulately about this. Now, some of it can get very nihilistic. I think that there is a way out, and I still am a libertarian in heart. I still sympathize with what Rothbard and Ron Paul and all of them have said. I still, maybe it's Pollyanna. I don't know. Maybe it's not possible, but I'm still, that's where I'm going. I'm trying to go in a open source, voluntarist sort of way. And that's what I've done on the internet. And of course, I haven't been successful. But I feel like, again, sometimes short-term gains don't always translate to the long-term goal that you thought you had. I think the biggest problem for voluntarism and the biggest problem from open source, this non-zero sum game, which is what I want to see happen. The biggest problem that faces all these three is the tragedy of the commons, in which, if you have a common place that nobody is taking explicit ownership of, that people will just trash it. And you can see that in a lot of places where that happens. So how are you going to do that without Leviathan? That is the big question. Like, how do you do it without the threat of Caesar? And
that's
I don't know.
That's what acceleration is about, which sort of excites me. I just don't quite understand it. It's saying we don't do it without Leviathan. We do it with Leviathan.
And I don't know if that's necessarily, and again, like their thought is progress at this point. Look what, but to me, I don't know. There are different types of progress. So this is why it gets kind of muddy to me. There's because progress of the state, and then there's progress of industry, and there's progress of mind. And in that terminology, I would say that accelerationists are progressive in terms of thought. They're interacting with stuff at a very fast level, in a very fast.
And I think that's what they mean. I think they're using technology. I think they're using the cathedral, Leviathan, whatever we want to call it, to communicate. And like you've said before, accelerate it in a way that's accelerating the use of it, but subverting it with the with a free message between people, communication and discussion, like we're doing here, or like you've done with them. You've been able to post things with them. Did you post Leviathan? Is that what they?
So that's what started this whole little rabbit hole for me, and that was just a couple of weeks ago. I was following Akira, had a little interaction with him on Twitter, and someone else in his stream posted something, and I was like, man, I don't even understand what y'all are talking about. Like, where do I begin? And so he gave me a couple things, and something I read in one of those posts, again, and that was from the neo reaction side. When I was reading, I was like, I don't know about this. There's but a lot of this, again, when we start digging deep down, a lot of these people, they want to be left alone. So they will say something that they know will just get them off the grid. Like, people, I don't want to deal with that person. That person's psycho. So it's all shit posting, right? Like, so much of it's shit posting. Like, they'll say something they actually mean, and then 2 sentences later, it's like, you know what? Too many people are paying attention to me. I'm going to sound like a Nazi. And so they'll just post this thing. And then everyone writes them off and like, okay, we're not going to deal with those people anymore. It's like, so that's actually a strategy for some of them. So anyways, I was reading one of those and I was like, I don't know about this. But then I came across like one of these phrases and I was like, man, this reminds me so much of what I'd written 2 years ago when I was in India, and just hitting the wall. I was hitting the wall ideologically. I was hitting the wall with YouTube. Oh man, you want to talk about like the cathedral? Just try to work for anything Google puts its tendrils on. Like that place is just, it is lost. So I'd posted this thing about Leviathan, and so Akira read it and liked some of the phraseology and put it on their website that he just launched, or one of them had just launched. So that's what kind of started this whole rabbit hole for me. One thing, I was having a meeting with 2 friends yesterday, and we're all sci-fi nerds, and I'm kind of coming back to it, so I'm trying to rediscover some stuff. So I've been picking people's brains about what sci-fi to read, and so one of the things I can't remember who they were talking about, but the guy's gotten into a lot of this pulp stuff. And he was saying, he kind of, every now and then he kind of likes this old pulpy stuff where it's basically, it was one of Lovecraft's contemporaries, and I can't remember his name right now, but they apparently corresponded about horror. Robert Howard. So there's a Robert Howard short story collection. It's like, and what it was, it's like Lovecraft was the nihilist, right? Like, oh, there's no stopping Cthulhu. Well, Howard, what he would do is he would throw some pulpy hero in the middle of Lovecraft. So it's like Ash versus the Evil Dead, right? Like,
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Me, I'm through running. Like you got this guy.
A boom stick.
He doesn't care. Like he's going to take this thing straight on. And so that's what I've started writing some fiction. And that most of my horror has a happy ending. Like you're staring into the abyss and you're blinking. Like that, your protagonist blinks. Your protagonist doesn't like oh man with terror. Like so, I guess that's where I'm still the optimist. In terms of like I think that the savior is going to win in the end. Like I think there is a way out. That the monster is not undefeatable. So that's kind of what I'm trying to figure. What does that mean for us as individuals? How do we be the pulp hero? That can actually do battle with the machine when it achieves, when Judgment Day happens.
Well, and I think one of the things is just looking at it, just taking a look at it. One of the greatest strengths of the Cathedral of Leviathan, we need to figure out a name for it, but is that nobody looks at it. It's right. It's subtle and it's unconscious. And we all participate in it without really knowing that we are. It's insidious. And I think the more we look at it, the more we shed light on it. And it's our participation with it. I think right. the more power we have over it.
Yeah. And a while back, even before I went to India, I started writing a story. Yeah, well, maybe it was after I went to India. There was something that that Stan Gibson. So he's one of these super smart dudes I know, and he's got he's a scientist and he's got multiple degrees, and he was just a very prolific reader. And so I think he called, I don't know, it was probably in a footnote on one of his blog posts. He said something about the tertium quid, the third path. That there really is a third path between these two points of view. And when he said that, I was just like, third path, that really summarizes like what I think a good life actually looks like. It's, because you got people who like back then I was thinking in terms of Christian terminology, you got the legalist on one hand who follows the letter of the law but doesn't follow the spirit of the law, and then you have the lawless person on the other hand who just follows their every whim or desire. And so it's like a tightrope walk. But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, it's actually like this trans-dimensional path that if you were to look at it from our point of view, it's kind of like with Lovecraft. Like it doesn't adhere to normal 3D geometry. Like what looks like it looks straight and narrow if you were to see it from the seventh dimensional perspective, but it actually is this strange thing that you can't compute. Like you're following the path, but then all of a sudden it diverges in the wood and you can't find it anymore, like using conventional means, And so that was one of the ideas. And then the other idea was the first part of this whole third path I was trying to write was the monster in the myriad. And so the monster being Leviathan, this giant monster in this, fantastic Final Fantasy style universe or whatever. There's this giant monster on the planet and it's cartoonishly large, bigger than Godzilla. And people will hear it's coming. It's almost like a hurricane. Like when the monster's coming, everyone evacuate town because it's going to eat the whole town. But it would only eat a town, once a week or something like that. So it's like, oh, well, we know it's coming. We know what it's going to eat. We know what we have to sacrifice to the god. Let's just leave him alone. But then finally people get sick of it. And one of these government, knights or whatever, one of these knights of the realm is like his family's in town. They can't get out. So he faces the thing and kills it and realizes it wasn't easy. It wasn't even hard to kill. Like he kills it simple. And then within a week, and this happens in every Final Fantasy, in every Zelda and everything, and every, RPG, Japanese RPG, there's always the monsters come when the bad thing is about to happen. You know, like Ganon is awakening, so monsters start showing up. Well, what happens with this is once Leviathan dies, then all these monsters show up, and they're tiny. And so it's the myriad. So what the monster was keeping the myriad back. And so that's what Thomas Hobbes was saying with Leviathan. Okay, you hate Leviathan? Yeah, good for you. Well, guess what it's holding back? Anarchy. And you just wait until you see, you know, you wait. You think Saddam's bad? Just wait for ISIS, baby. Like, that's the real world. And that's why, you know, I was so mad, annoyed with the new Star Wars incarnations, because we don't need another narrative about this giant monolithic enemy. It's like, no, your enemy is in the back of your skull. You know, like there's something you don't know, that you are part of the myriad and you don't even know it. Like, you are the zombie and you're just latently waiting for Leviathan to die, and you're going to turn into the zombie once it's dead. Yeah. Like, that's the next level of it. So that's what the monster and the myriad idea is.
Wow, I like that.
So anyways, like I think, though, there is a solution, but we can't be pat about it, because any of the solutions I read in these entrepreneurial books, I'm reading Thiel's 0 to 1 right now. I love a lot of it, but I read some of it, and just the way in which he's just admitting, like, you just have to be complicit with the machine. You have to worship a Leviathan at a certain point. And I just like, I just don't.
Well,
I don't want to compromise at that level. Like,
yeah, that's my problem with accelerationism, is we don't want to accelerate evil, and we don't want to participate and accelerate with evil.
Yeah, right? And see, I don't think most of them are saying it in that way. No, I know that's why I want to try to figure out, because I don't think most of them would look at Thiel or Musk as accelerationists. I don't know, maybe Musk. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Well, we have to wrap it up here, but to bring it more to our own lives, I have been thinking about and sort of mulling like depression, because we talked about how depression. What is it you said that you thought the depression may be just when we are out of sync, or that the system outside of us is gone wrong, and we don't fit into it anymore, or something like that. What did you say?
So I honestly think that there are a lot of people, and this extends across cultural boundaries. I think in the West, it tends to come out as suicide or rampage killings. In Japan, it tends to come out as suicide. And in the Middle East, it tends to come out as terrorist attacks. Now, I don't think all terrorist attacks can be quantified in the same way, but I do think if you were to really honestly do a study on all these people across cultural lines, you would find men who were disturbed. Like, they weren't just ideological. There was something behind the ideology that they could not function in their society.
Right. Well, we're gonna talk more about the
but they're basically canaries in the coal mine. Like, that was what I was saying. Is these people are attuned to something that other people aren't attuned to. They are a symptom of something deeper wrong. When I found out about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, there's a part of me that sympathized with them. Like, I felt what they felt. Again, that you don't want to say what they did was heinous, terrible. Of course, we all agree with that. But there's what was behind it. What caused them to do that? And I honestly think there's so much that we just throw drugs at, which makes it worse. Psychotropic drugs that I think may drive them even more mad. Maybe it works on somebody else, but for this person, no. They know something's wrong, and you're telling them, no, it's not wrong. You're just wrong. We'll fix you, sweetie. And you try to fix them, and they go nuts because they know it's wrong.
To that point, as I was talking to one of my counselor friends about accelerationism and depression and group work, because I think I brought up to you before off the air about group work and how the one who is disturbed, or how did he put it? Oh man, he put it perfectly. I can't remember what he said, but the exception. He said, yeah, in the group system, you can examine the exception and see the truth of a group in the form of a symptom. And what he was saying, and then to depression, he said, I always see depression as a sign that something isn't working. It's also very rare, in my opinion, that people actually sit with and engage in depression. Our society has too many rescues,
Yes.
drugs, and alcohol, TV, these escapes. I reframe depression as not being able to leave the bed in the morning, and how most people can let themselves just stay in bed, stay with their feelings, and let depression lead to change and growth. Anytime I work with somebody who's depressed, identifies as depressed, I prescribe the symptom and tell them to stay in bed all weekend. Don't watch TV. Don't escape. Don't, medicate or use the internet, anything of this. Just be depressed. Cry, eat, take a crap, whatever you need to do, but stay in the depression. And they come back on Monday ready to work.
Yeah. See, I think that is fantastic. I think, it doesn't matter if you're a believer or not. If you can go back and look at the book of Job, like that is a masterclass in dealing with depression. You got 3 friends who are trying to blame him, trying to admit his culpability. Oh, you did something wrong here. Sometimes that's true for someone in depression. Sometimes they've made a lot of bad decisions, and that needs to be worked through. Like if it's true, you must work through it. And by the end, Job does make some mistakes, and he does work through that. Like he realizes it, but sometimes things suck, and the system isn't fair. So you don't pretend that it's right,
that everything's okay.
Yes, something's broken, and this person's mourning about it. And you want to just throw this little band-aid over. No, society's perfectly fine. I mean, think it was worse 100 years ago. Yeah, you're not listening to me. Something's messed up.
Yeah.
And like, I love, again, I talk about Serenity Firefly all the time, but for me, there's that moment where in Serenity, River, she throws up after she's seen this communique that shows, this record that shows what happened. Like, this has been assaulting her mind. She's had these millions of dead people in her mind, but she couldn't articulate. And so when she sees what it actually looks like, she's like, I'm okay. Like, she's able to actually feel herself for a little bit. She had all this weight that she was carrying around. And I think a lot of depressed people are carrying around that weight. They can't tell you why, but they have a sixth sense. And I think that sixth sense is something that science can't accurately quantify yet. And up until now, it's been religion or superstition or shamanism or, whatever. But most of that is hocus pocus, most of it. But some of it, I think, is real. Like, that person just had every extra sensory perception or something. Like, they are onto something that's not hitting your wavelength. And you've shut that part of your psyche down. Like, that person's onto something. Don't like take what they're saying idly,
And that's what today, what I want to embrace. I don't embrace accelerationism or all the people involved, but I do embrace this idea that something's wrong.
Yeah.
And I do want to engage with. I'm not here to fight it. I'm just here to look at it.
Right.
And to talk about it. To talk about it with you, to talk about it with whoever wants to listen.
Right.
And but let's admit that there's a problem. And that that when, our anger and depression is not the problem.
Right. Right.
What's the problem is out there. And let's work together to see what we can do about it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't mean we don't do anything about it. We can still do something about it in our own lives. But a lot of that, what we need to do is just discuss it, talk about it, work with each other, and not let Leviathan rule our lives.
Right. And if it's inevitable that Leviathan do, then, like you said, shine more light on it. Understand this game a little better. Quit being so willfully naive or totally blind to it. Like let's at least be able to understand how we can, in my analogy, like, maybe there's a way to get that, Leviathan to eat, one village a month instead of one a week. Like, let's take this one step at a time. Maybe there's an incremental way to make this at least a little less horrible. And if the singularity is going to happen, at least you can prepare for it then, like, as opposed to just blissfully, wandering about. Like, I mean, the financial system is just, oh, yay, everything's great, man. We're just doing all these house loans and credit default swaps. Great. Boom. Like, let's be prepared here.
Yeah. All right. Amen. Is it okay if I post Leviathan in the notes in the doobly-doo below?
And there's something else here. You know, this one I feel like it's a video I made when I was in India in my film. Let me see if I can find it real quick. And yeah, I'll send it to you afterwards. But it was
send it to me on Facebook.
Okay, so it was basically my ruminations over these kind of frustrations. I think, again, a Marxist could listen to this, a socialist, a capitalist, a Christian or an atheist, or any other religion in between could watch this and be like, yeah, I mean, there's something there. Like, because that's where Leviathan came from. When I saw these realities, like this was my first rumination about it. This video that I wrote. So
okay,
I'll share that with you.
So if you want to find a link to that, also, there's a lot to say. We're out of time. Follow us if you want to see this live. Whenever we record this, I don't know if Ford knows this, but this is live, and anybody can tune in if they want. And if you subscribe to us on YouTube and hit the little bell, you can get notifications anytime we go live, and you can watch us if you have time. Otherwise, find us on Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and other avenues of the Leviathan.
Other appendages,
other veins in the SO. And let's just keep talking about this. Get to work. There's a lot to build. And then you say,
oh, make your own myth.